From the shadows where the whispers grow, through the night where the warriors flow, feel the power in the tales untold. Lord Ninja Choke takes a strong hold.
Hello everyone and welcome to episode 13 of the Lord Ninja Choke MMA Picks podcast. This week we are going to be looking at UFC Vegas 108, which is supposed to be headlined by Amir Albazi and Tatsuro Taira, though we are hearing heavy rumors that this fight has actually been cancelled, so we don't have an official main event for this one. But yeah, we're just going to roll with it. So as always, we want to have a very quick look at last week's results. So obviously we picked three fighters across three different fights. We had Josh on Robert Whittaker, myself on Bryce Mitchell, and Dom on Asu Almabayev. Obviously we went 2-1 with picks there. Mitchell and Almabayev on the winning side, and Whittaker unfortunately just falling short in a very close but very entertaining main event. That has brought our picks percentage to 72% accuracy with an average odds of minus 118, which again, still performing at a very high clip. We're all very happy with how that's going. Lots of green there on the table. So hopefully we keep it rolling into this card. And as always, a very quick recap of how our bets went. First up from me, I staked 8.6 units and profited 3.67. So a return on investment of around 43%. Very happy with that. I had an entire underdog slate for all of my moneyline bets. Bogdan Guskov, Bryce Mitchell, Tabitha Ricci, and Davey Grant all came through for me. Very happy with those. It's really nice to be like in my underdog era. Very much enjoying myself. Yeah, I've gone are the days of paying chalk because every single time I do that and I make myself a parlay of two shorter prices, I seem to fuck it up. So yeah, I did lose a 2-unit bet on the Aslan Elikana fight not going the distance, which obviously went up shit's creek. But yeah, overall very happy. Money lines are great. Having a good time. Onwards to this week.
Oops. So yeah, I went from having like my worst card last week where I lost 7 units to reverse this week, which basically like my best card probably ever that I can remember anyway. So managed to hit pretty much everything. I took a more focused approach, so I didn't have so many fighters on the money lines. I think I had 4 or 5 last time, and that was a mistake. That was the Max Holloway card where I really felt Max was the side and probably should have just played Max a little bit more. Here I felt Asu was the side, so I invested in Asu. Richie was more a play on the odds because she ballooned to I think as high as plus 180 or 185 at some point during the week, maybe in 190. I caught her at plus 180 after already having bet her at plus 150. That was, you know, a very good value bet in the end, and she actually finished Amanda Ribas, which was rather unexpected. And then the other bet that I had was the main event to go long, which was over 2.5 rounds, and that was a bit hairy. It was a bit scary, but I kind of could see that it was a competitive fight. And the third round was crazy. I think that was, yeah, I think the knockdown came before halfway through, the double knockdown. But yeah, we managed to get that one. And then Peter Yan, I mentioned last week that I thought he was going to be indomitable against McGee, and he won unanimously on 2 of the judges' scorecards. I had the Nurmagomedov scorecards no action, which returned because that went to decision and Bryce won the decision. That was looking quite good. Nurmagomedov had the early success, and I did think he was going to finish, to be honest, but he didn't. And then had the Nguyen TKO. The odds are actually plus 200 on that. It says here plus 100. Yeah, what about you, Josh?
Yeah, what about me? Pick wise, pretty bad. It's like watching a bushfire in the distance burn all the trees down. I mean, bad. The only saving grace here really is the Salikov KO round 102 alt bet that I got there. That kind of, you know, saved my ass a bit, but otherwise I am vocally fucking disappointed in how I went. The whole weekend I was ranting and raving, or well, not the whole weekend, but like, after the event, I was a bit shitty. So Will and Dom copped me being shitty for a few hours, but it happens, and on to the next, really.
Yeah, from a picks perspective, that was a very rough card. There were a lot of favorites that you thought would probably going to win, but could get a bit sketchy. And, everything that felt like it could be sketchy was sketchy. So, yeah, a tough week for picks. I don't think many people did well in that regard. But yeah, onwards to next week, we have UFC Vegas 108, headlined by a mystery fight that we don't know yet. This card, yeah, it really doesn't fill me with any excitement. I don't even want to break it down. So does anyone have anything they want to say about this one before we break down some fights?
Go ahead, Josh.
It feels like the polar opposite of like last week, where last week had like interesting storylines and really fascinating fights, but this week it's just like crap. All right, that's all I go. Just crap.
Yeah, that sums it up really, because I was going to take the main event, so I was quite looking forward to breaking that down. That's fallen off. So yeah, it's a dumpster fire.
It is indeed a dumpster fire. It is indeed crap. But either way, we're going to break it down. So yeah, let's get into our first fight. First fight is the co-main event between Mateusz Rebecki and Chris Duncan. I have the privilege of breaking this one down. So historically, I've been a huge hater of Chris Duncan. I think I've bet against him pretty much every time he's been in a Contender Series or UFC fight. I never really rated him. I thought he was just a brawler who was very high variance and high chaos, but minute to minute wasn't very good. And historically, I always kind of lean away from backing those guys. I like to fade them in those situations. And conversely, Mateusz Rebecki, his first few UFC fights were very impressive. He looked good. He looked great. I was really excited to see how far he was going to go. And I think he had about 3 wins in the UFC before he faced Carlos Diego Ferreira. And yeah, it was basically just 3 fights of a highlight reel. He looked like a really well-rounded fighter that pushed a high pace, had some good grappling, had some sneaky submissions up his sleeve as well. Lots to like there. And I think he went into the Carlos Diego Ferreira fight as a massive favorite, with all of this hype being sort of like snowballed together against Diego Ferreira is pretty old now as well. It felt like it was a fight where he was sort of supposed to go out there and squash the old man and get another win on his record. But we then realized very quickly that Rebecki is a flawed fighter because he's a good hammer, but he's a terrible nail. And anytime he faces adversity, he really struggles, because he needs to be mauling guys to look good and look competent, because his actual like skill set, when you compare him against somebody who's not just going to bow down to it, it's actually not that great. In the striking department, he does a lot of herky-jerky movement. In a way, it kind of reminds me of Merab Dvalishvili, but his actual striking is very single power shot. He throws a lot of overhand rights and just sort of throws himself into it and crashes the pocket with one big shot. And he did drop Carlos Diego Ferreira in the first round of that fight, and he has had moments where that burst of just one shot power has really done well for him, but it's not great. And I think if you see it coming and you make the right read, it really is exploitable. And Carlos Diego Ferreira started to exploit it, and suddenly we just saw Rebecki fall apart. And the reason for the falling apart was because his cardio is very suspect. In that first round, he moves around like an Energizer bunny, as I said, Merab-like, and he throws that massive shot, and he throws himself into his takedowns. Very explosive blast double leg that he's got. But he has to work so hard, and he doesn't have very good top control either. So, he has to reset and go for those takedowns all over again. So it's just like lots of bursts of energy in that first round. He's moving around, lots of unnecessary head movement and sidestepping before he throws his all into a shot or a takedown. It's just not a very conservative approach. And he really is banking on an early finish. And if he doesn't get that early finish, we've seen what happens in the halfway round of fights. Against Carlos Diego Ferreira, he completely fell apart, and that finish was pitiful. He could barely even stand. Like, it was a mercy stoppage in the last few seconds of the fight. And the same goes for against Muktikbek Oralbay in his last fight. Yes, he did come away with the win, and he was a relatively sized underdog in that one. But he was doing well from the get-go in the striking department against Oralbay, and he was obviously defending the takedowns. But as soon as he realized that I can't put this guy away because he just won't die, he wilted again, and it was more of the same. His offense got really limited, and he didn't have a plan B, didn't have anything to rely on as a backup plan, and it just all sort of fell apart, and he limped to the finish line. So how does this all compare against Chris Duncan? I may have said some negative things about Chris Duncan, but like I said, he's gritty and he is up for a war, and he will not back down. So right off the bat, when it comes to Rebecki needing to be a good hammer against an opponent that's going to wilt, I do not think Chris Duncan is going to wilt. He's going to meet him in the middle, and if it comes to this throwing of a single shot and crash in the pocket, Duncan is going to be right there and is going to be ready to throw back and will bite down on the mouthpiece and really go for it. That immediately makes this a sort of high variance fight where there's going to be a lot of chaos in the opening round. Rebecki will have probably the opportunity to take him down, and he probably will land takedowns, but Chris Duncan, we've seen how aggressive his guard is and how impressive his guillotine choke and his front chokes are. So I think that will immediately give Rebecki fits. And I think there's quite a high likelihood that Duncan can use that to get back to his feet. And I don't think that Rebecki has very good top control anyway. But if you add in the sort of threat of, do I really want to be down here with this guy who keeps trying to submit me? I don't think that Rebecki is going to have a whole lot of top control time. So those two things together, all the resistance that Chris Duncan is going to give, kind of really does lean into that narrative about the cardio again, because I think that Rebecki is going to be having to put out a lot of output in the first half of the fight to try and have his way with Chris Duncan, and he probably will, and he'll probably be superior. But I think if we get to a second half here, Chris Duncan's going to be the fresher dude because he's used to fighting in these kind of barn burners and wars, whereas Rebecki's coming up against somebody that he hasn't put away yet, and we know what happens in the second half of fights. So from a betting perspective, you've got Rebecki at around minus 225, minus 250, whereas Chris Duncan's around plus 170, plus 180. I understand that from the moment this fight starts, Rebecki's going to look good, and he's probably going to look like he deserves to be that price tag. But if he doesn't put Chris Duncan away, which I don't think he will, this one gets very, very dicey for Rebecki. It becomes another sweaty Rebecki fight, and Chris Duncan, he's just one of those guys that is consistently performing as an underdog. He's so dangerous. He has the finishing potential early, and I think here he's going to have the finishing potential late. So if you've got a guy who's plus 170, you definitely want someone who's going to fight for your money, especially against Rebecki. And I think that Duncan is absolutely live to do that. He could get a finish at any point. He could get an attritional finish late. I just don't think that you can trust Rebecki in a fight that's going to turn into a barn burner and could become a war of attrition. So for that reason alone, plus 170, sign me up. I've bet Chris Duncan for 1.5 units here. In terms of confidence, it's going to be a high variance fight. I can't really tell you that I think this one is, a lock of any sorts, but I do really think that Chris Duncan is going to have a real go at this. And I see more flaws on Rebecki's side. So I have given this a 2 on the confidence scale. I don't really expect my co-hosts to really back me on that one, but I'll stand on business. So I'll give that one a 2, but Duncan's definitely the side as far as I'm concerned. What do you guys think?
Do you want to go first, Josh?
Yeah, all right. I didn't have much to really say because I reckon Will hit the nail on the head. This fight, at least stylistically, reminds me of, and this is going to sound weird, but Whitaker and DeBrither. And I only say that because the only reads I have for this one in terms of striking is that Rebecki has to launch himself into the range of Duncan, and Duncan being the more taller, leaner guy, I reckon a knee up the middle would be a perfect counter to whatever Rebecki will try to do, right? The submission threat from Duncan is also a high possibility, I suppose. I mean, as Will said, the front headlock chokes, the guard play he's really, really good on the ground. And eventually the fight's going to hit the ground, right? Because if Rebecki gets a knockdown, he's not going to just stand there doing nothing. He's going to lead with the ground and pound. So it's a bit hairy. I can't get a proper read on this fight. It's going to be chaotic and messy for maybe 2 rounds. And if Duncan survives those 2 rounds, maybe Rebecki is going to still have that cardio to, keep going for the final round. But ultimately, it's I can't really get a read on this one. So when it comes to the confidence pick, I can't really plus or stay away from it. So I'm just gonna leave it as is. What about you, Dom?
Yeah, so I think I haven't looked as deep into this as Will has, but my impression of this is that the line is wide and that definitely Chris Duncan is the value side. I'm kind of shocked to see that Chris Duncan is, plus 180, is it? Depends which book you look at, but it seems to be you can get him as high as plus 180. That seems to be or plus 185 even. Yeah, a couple of books having plus 185. I mean, that strikes me as incredibly wide, given that there's like, they've got similar UFC experience, haven't they? So similar number of fights, 6 or 7 fights, both of them. They're similar age, right? So like 32, 33. Then Chris Duncan's got the height and reach advantage. And as you mentioned, of course, and by the way, great pronunciation of Rebecki. That's like spot on Polish pronunciation. My wife's Polish, so it's great to hear that, because I think people might say Rebecki, but it's Rebecki. Yeah. Rebecki is that like kind of wrecking ball in the first round. But I completely agree. I think I've seen him gas a few times. I just need to look at his fights to remember which fights they were. Obviously the oral by fight, but I mean, I think there's mitigating circumstances. They were both gassed in that fight. But obviously, yes, the Diego Ferreira. Going back further than that, I think I remember watching the Radzhabov fight. I think he looked like he was getting. He won that one with the TKO in the second round, so it wasn't that one. Yeah, I think he's liable to get a bit gassy in the later rounds because of his short, stocky, highly muscled anatomy. But yeah, I think that if we focus on Duncan, he's just looked really impressive. Like the Vucinic win, of course, Jordan was a much less experienced fighter, but he looked really good in that. His striking looks really good. And then, I think he was an underdog against Balaji Oki. Of course, he got the early guillotine choke in round 1 there. So, I mean, he's got some momentum. I can't see why the line would be this wide. I mean, maybe you could make a case, like you said, maybe she should be like plus 150. He's at risk of getting mauled or knocked out early. But I think if the fight goes longer, you're absolutely right. I think he's going to look like great value at plus 180. I'm certainly really tempted to look into this and to bet this. I would upvote it if I'd spent more time watching tape on Chris Duncan, but I think essentially all the reasoning is in place to make him a great, maybe the best underdog on the card. And another thing I just noticed is that Chris Duncan's been training over in America since at least July 19th. So, he's been there for a while. I mean, he had a photo of him training at Pit Fitness in Boca Raton on July 19th, but I think he's been there longer than that. So he's obviously taking this super seriously, like you say, training with Dustin Poirier, improving his striking. Mike Brown seems to be helping him with his camp. So I think those are really good signs. I can't see that on the Rebecki side. So I can't. He's obviously training in Poland. I can't see him having gone over to the US or when he went over. But actually, looking at this, I think that July the 8th. Sorry, he's been in America for a long time. So that's a really good sign. Because I mean, Vegas it's a long way from Poland. I mean, I don't know how far out Rebecki's going to get there. But I like to look into these things because obviously it was a big feature of the Almabayev Ochoa fight, which people weren't capping properly because it's a long way to go from. I don't even know where Ochoa was, but he was obviously in America. Then he was in Brazil, and going from Brazil to the Middle East. I think this is a good thing, on the Duncan side that he's been out there training. Looks like so the earliest photo is a photo of him at American Top Team, July 7th. with a guy who looks just like Rebecki, to be honest. That's really weird. I'm pretty sure that's not Rebecki, but just a guy who looks like him. That kind of threw me off for a second. So yeah, that's like 3 weeks preparation. So yeah, I think it's a great pick. Very close. I mean, you can probably take this as a medium, but yeah. Any last thoughts, Will?
Only that I can hear the bagpipes playing in the background. Let's get it.
All right. This is my fight, and I only picked it really because it's a bit easy to break down. I figured that the Whitaker and Derrida one was a bit crazy, and I need a bit of a holiday right now because of that pick. But yeah, when it comes to Nakamura, I have been a vocal advocate for him. He won the first Road to UFC tournament, and honestly, since then, and maybe excluding his last fight against Gafarov, I've always been like a 3 out of 3 confidence pick person for Nakamura. So obviously my hype for him is pretty high coming into this fight against Fletcher. But there are some issues that I have with Nakamura. First of all, the odds that I saw were like minus 430 for Nakamura, which seems outrageous because if someone's style, if someone cannot use their style effectively, and they're that one-dimensional like Nakamura is, then I don't think that those odds are really great. Like I feel uneasy seeing those numbers. I can't tell you what I prefer. But somewhat closer to the even odds. I don't know. But anyway, Nakamura's entire style, as we all probably know by now, is his wrestling. He is one of the best wrestlers to come out from that region, the whole Oceanic region. But he's not only a wrestler, right? Like when it comes to wrestling, the commonality we see that with wrestlers is that they strike really well. They're comfortable with striking and using their hands to set the takedowns, and that's where I see the biggest gap in this fight, because Fletcher himself doesn't have that great striking. He's more of a grappler, submission specialist. So ultimately, I do expect Nakamura to be the one to pressure and to be the main acting catalyst of this fight, right? He's going to be the one that's going to start all of the action. He's going to be the one to push Fletcher onto his back foot. Only if Nakamura does fight like I hope he does, right? Because obviously he didn't against Gafarov, and that was a bit of a disappointing fight. But as for Fletcher, I cannot say much about him. He trains alongside Paddy Pimblett and all those guys, so I expect some sort of good grappling from him. But my rule set when it comes to wrestlers versus grapplers is that the wrestler always wins because they're used to being fended off by grapplers, right? Like anytime someone's in the guard of a good grappler, they have to know what is being set up or what the little shifts in position could lead to submission-wise. So I just cannot give Fletcher much hope, but outside of a early chance submission, because still, as much as I did crap on Nakamura for his last performance, he still is a prospect. He still is someone who belongs in the UFC, and he's someone who deserves to be a favorite, but maybe not at minus 430. So I'm not one to talk about value here, but I reckon there is no real other play here than Nakamura. I just can't see Fletcher winning this one, and so when it comes to my prediction and my pick, I got Nakamura winning this one, and my confidence level is going to be a nice and snazzy 2 out of 3. What do you guys have?
Go ahead, Will.
First things first, I'm baffled that Nakamura is minus 450. Not because of the stylistics of the fight, but just simply because when you're a big favorite and you shit the bed and you crash everyone's parlays, I just can't imagine anyone wants to bet him at minus 450 here. The MMA betting community have very short memories, but they don't forget the last result. And Nakamura is on everyone's ban list for the moment after that awful display he put off in his last fight. As you said, Josh, he's so obviously known for being a very good wrestler, and he is a very good wrestler, but he didn't shoot, which is, pretty obviously there's a real flaw there. But to be honest, it was one of the most baffling fights in terms of expectation versus reality from Nakamura that I almost give him a pass for it, because it was so bizarre and dumb that I feel like there must have been a reason. We don't get to necessarily hear all of the reasoning for it, and I haven't delved into any sort of interviews, post-fight scrums, or anything like that explain why he fought so insanely badly. But I can only assume that there must have been some sort of injury or some sort of mitigating circumstances that stopped him from shooting, because it was insanely weird. But if that's the case, I think he should have a pretty good bounce back spot against Fletcher here. I did a little bit of tape on Fletcher. I rewatched his fight most recently against Calvin Loughran, and that one really demonstrated that his takedown defense and his ability to be grappled is a real flaw of his. The get-ups were there and the grappling defense was there, to the point where I was quite impressed with how he handled it when he had when he was on the mat, or who was like being threatened with a takedown. But I think there's a big difference between Loughran and Nakamura in terms of their skill set when it comes to like on mat grappling. So if Fletcher was unable to use his footwork or his striking to deter that grappling game plan from being forced on him, if Nakamura fights like we expect him to, I can't see a world in which Nakamura doesn't dominate him. I guess it really just becomes a case of like, how much do you trust the guy after absolutely shitting the bed with a performance like that against Gafarov? Like I said, I gave him a pass for it, so I'm happy to +1 you pick on Nakamura pretty confidently. But yeah, if we get to round 2 and he hasn't shot a takedown yet, then things are going to get dicey. But you just got to hope he's got the brain cells to realize who he is and what he's good at.
Yeah, so if Will's giving it a +1, that's a medium confidence pick. From my side of things, I actually haven't watched a lot of tape on either of these chaps. So I was like trying to research about the Nakamura fight. I do recall watching Gafarov Nakamura, and yeah, it's definitely puzzling as to why he didn't try to take Gafarov down, given that was probably his easiest path to victory. And the sort of online sphere is suspecting that he thought his striking would be enough to compete with Gafarov. I don't know if that's true or not. If that's the case, it's obviously very poor game planning. You'd hope that he would have looked at some of the tape on Fletcher, because you don't have to look far to see that, he gets taken down easily, as you already mentioned, not just in the Loughran fight, but in some of the Cage Warriors footage, you can see he does get taken down. But he's not a fish out of water on the mat by any means. But I think the gulf, as you mentioned, Josh, is so large here in the wrestling that he should be a big favorite, basically. And it doesn't. I think sometimes with these losses, you mentioned, Will, and then the instant reaction, I think it depends a lot upon the opponent. So like in the case of Diego Lima, people are thinking, well, this guy, he's so well rounded, he's going to implement this grappling game plan, which is going to make Peyton Talbot pay for his mistakes like he did in the last one. But I don't think Nathan Fletcher is much of a threat to Nakamura anywhere, really. I don't think he's a more dangerous opponent than Gafarov. Having said that, I don't think he's that much worse an opponent than Gafarov. So if Nakamura decides for some reason not to shoot, then I think that is potentially the angle you could look at here, is that somehow this is a stand-up fight, and then I don't think Nakamura is that good on the feet. I haven't looked at it enough to be able to upvote this, but any final thoughts, Josh?
Not really. I just hope that Nakamura doesn't shit the bed this time. Really, I have been such a huge fan of Nakamura. I rarely stray from hype trains. I'm not usually one to be susceptible to hype trains, but in Nakamura's case, he really captured my mind. Like, not in a romantic way, but like mostly in a way that you can see the potential. But I just hope that we see that potential again, right? But that's all I
Yeah.
got.
I mean, on the comment on the line that Will made, like you said, you find it baffling that he's minus whatever it is, 350, 400. I mean, we said that same thing about Jan last week, but it depends, right? If he does grapple from start to finish, he may well justify being that kind of line. And in the Jan fight, I remember commenting that this line was wide in the first round, but over the course of the fight, I kind of retract that now and say like the line is probably more or less accurate. He should have been a big favorite, and that it played out that way. Yeah, McGee looked good in the first round. I don't think I think a lot of fights can seem close in the first round, but when you kind of zoom out, I don't think McGee really was threatening enough. Like, it never felt like it was a particularly risky fight. But anyway, that was last week's. This is this week's, and we hope that Nakamura will show he's a class above. And just, I want to actually do something quickly. I just want to show you guys something, because I think earlier you heard me say, oh, I think that Chris Duncan and Rebecki are pictured together at American Top Team. This is actually them in American Top Team, and I put this here because actually I think it's a plus for the bet on Chris Duncan, because many times when opponents face each other who are familiar with each other's games, it's much closer. And the only time I can really remember that this happening in recent memory, particularly, was Volkov and Pavlovich. Everyone's like, Pavlovich, he's going to win. I was like, no, I don't think that's the case. If they train together, they know each other's strengths and weaknesses, they know the movement patterns. So because Rebecki is the Pavlovich in this scenario with the big power, and he's going to need to get close and close the distance, I think this is a boon for the bet on Chris Duncan. And it sometimes these little things that help. This was on July the 7th. The only thing it negates is obviously Rebecki has been in the US. I don't know if he flew back to Poland or not, but it looks like he's also been in the US. So, yep. So my fight was initially going to be Tatsuro Taira against Albazi, and no surprises there. I was leaning towards Taira, but I felt like that fight was going to be very close. 5-round flyweights, lots of volatility. I thought Albazi, depending on his training and so forth, I thought he could have made that fight competitive. That was my opinion. I've seen a lot of people saying Taira would have walked through him, but definitely not the case. I think Albazi had a bad performance against Moreno, and I know people are saying it's the worst robbery against Kai Kara-France, but I'll tell you what, it's to go 5 rounds with Kai Kara-France and do a lot of striking with him, take his back and so forth. It says a lot about you. I think Albazi is a very, very high level flyweight, and I am a little bit biased towards him because he's British. Well, he's from the UK, as am I. But I think a lot of people are underestimating Albazi in that spot. And while I wouldn't have picked him, I would have thought something like a point spread on him. I think it would have been a decision probably to Taira, maybe like 3-2, something like that. So I think a point spread would have been a great value bet, because just so you know, the point spread is just you have to win 1 round. So I felt like he could have done that. I think Albazi could have won a round against Taira. Anyway, on to this fight. Rodolfo Viera against Tresean Gore. For those that don't know, Tresean Gore was on The Ultimate Fighter, and he didn't win it because he had to withdraw, and that was ultimately won by Brian Battle. And yeah, Rodolfo Viera is a top-level BJJ world champion, multiple-time world champion. He's been in the UFC longer than Tresean Gore, so Rodolfo Viera is 5-3 in the UFC. Tresean Gore is 2-3. So on the surface level here, you know Rodolfo Viera, he's the favorite. Tresean Gore is the underdog. You think, okay, it's pretty straightforward. Rodolfo Viera is going to take him down and sub him, because most of Rodolfo Viera's victories, I think actually all but one, are subs in the UFC. No, sorry, they're all subs. his five wins in the UFC, 5 subs. His losses are 1 by sub, which was quite surprising. That was Fluffy Hernandez, and 2 decisions. He lost his last fight against Andre Petroski. And this is where you can develop your thesis for Tresean Gore, because Petroski is like a thick, heavy-set wrestler who didn't wrestle in that fight, but he used his wrestling pedigree to prevent Viera from taking him down. And I think Viera got him down once in that fight, but he popped back up. So basically it was a stand-up fight, which made Rodolfo Viera very uncomfortable. Yeah, the stats are saying 1 takedown for Viera, but I skipped through the fight and there wasn't much time on the ground, so there wasn't much control time in that fight for Rodolfo. It says a minute 50. He wasn't able to sub Petrosky obviously in the minute 50 he had of control time. Tresean Gore has like a really good takedown defense stat. I mean, he's only got 5 fights in the UFC, so you have to take it with a pinch of salt. But his takedown defense is about 83%, I think. I'll go back here. Yeah, 83%. He hasn't really fought many wrestlers, so that's the only issue with that stat. Brian Battle took him down once. Cody Brundage took him down once. That's the only issue, I think, is Rodolfo Viera should just shoot from the outset. His primary win condition is submission. He's unlikely to want to stand and trade with someone who's as powerful as Tresean Gore. Tresean Gore isn't the most refined striker. We saw in his last fight. I watched the last fight actually against Marco Tulio, and Tresean Gore is tough. Like, he can take a lot of punishment. I mean, that wasn't a close fight. Marco Tulio was lighting up Tresean Gore on the feet, and eventually TKO'd him in round 2. But I mean, he just took so much punishment. He just kept walking forward. And even the TKO, I mean, even though he went down, he still wanted to keep fighting. So if this is a stand-up war, I think we can rely on Tresean Gore to really take the fight to Viera. But having said that, I think he's going to be very wary about getting taken down, getting his back taken. And I think the likely thing is, if this fight goes to the mat, it's going to be, lights out for Gore. If it stays standing, it's going to be lights out for Viera. That's probably the binary nature of this matchup. With very low confidence, I think, because Tresean Gore has a clear path to victory by following what Petrosky did, and what other fighters have done against Viera. Like Chris Curtis was very good at keeping Viera off him. And obviously Anthony Hernandez is just a monster, so just wore him out, took him down. There was Anthony Hernandez taking Viera down in that fight. So there's a clear path to victory that Tresean Gore can follow. With low confidence, I'm picking Tresean Gore, but I haven't managed to deep dive this fight as much as I normally do for one of my fights on the podcast, because, as I said, I was really focused on the main event, which has now fallen out. So yeah, hand over to Josh and Will to get some more color to this.
I cannot get a read on this fight. I have always been an advocate for specialists in the game, and in this case, Viera being the grappling specialist, I do expect him to grapple. But one thing I want to mention here is that Viera has fought great strikers. I mean, he went 3 rounds against Chris Curtis, and that's the only fight I can really remember, by the way. Like, any other fight, when I think of Viera, it's just like blank. So this is a terrible breakdown. Will can probably do a better job than me, but at this moment, I do believe that Viera is a bit probably a bit of a better striker. Like, I know that's contradictory to what Dom said, but I just feel like that Viera's improvements outweigh Gore's like now current skill set. Like, I can't see Gore improving his striking as much as Viera has improved his. And since Viera has more pathways to victory, I do want to kind of not so much go against Dom's pick here, but just be a bit weary about picking Gore. So that's all I have to say. It's a very iffy fight for me, I guess. What about you, Will?
Completely contrary to you, I am always someone who picks on specialists. I always try and target them for a fade. And Rodolfo Viera is a guy that I do like to target for a fade. My favorite bet that I've won this year was 2 units on Andre Petrosky against Rodolfo Viera at plus 200, because my analysis is the same as it always is for Viera. It simply becomes a case of, do I think he can get the fight to the floor? And Petrosky's a very good wrestler and a very good grappler. I thought the fact that betting line was getting worse, like better and better and better for Petrosky as the week went by, because people were convinced he would just take down, sub him in round one. I thought that's crazy. Like, when does anyone ever out grappled Andre Petrosky? So yeah, that was one of my favorite bets. I digress. I did take some time to watch tape on this fight because, for basically the same reason, I think the blueprint is absolutely there to beating Rodolfo Viera. You just need to keep it standing. So, we haven't seen a whole lot of Tresean Gore inside the octagon, despite him having like 5 fights. But I went and watched all of the instances of him facing a takedown, and there isn't enough information to get a really solid read on it, because not only is there a small sample size, the names of the guys that he's like going up against are not particularly like inspiring. Cody Brundage, he did lose that fight, and Cody Brundage did get him down, but he popped straight back up again. And basically, in short, before I go into every single one of them, which I'm not going to do, Tresean Gore shows that he's got the right idea. He knows how to defend a takedown, and he knows how to pop right back up if he does get taken down. He knows not to show his back. He has the fundamentals, basically. And whilst I can't say it with a high amount of confidence, I think that there is potential for him to be good enough at keeping the fight standing. And if that's the case, we come back to the debate of the striking. I do think Tresean Gore's a bit of a flawed fighter. He can be very low volume at times, but I think the power difference can be quite big here, in that I think Rodolfo Viera will probably get put off from being so committed to his takedown entries, just because of the amount of firepower coming backwards, because his record may not show it with the amount of the lack of a UFC KO win, but Tresean Gore does throw heat. Like, he hits fucking hard. If I remember, this is going completely off memory. That's like literally more than 5 years old here. But like in the Ultimate Fighter house, the guy was terrifying. Like, he was a fucking unit. I'm pretty certain he could finish Rodolfo Viera, or at least hurt him, or at least make him think twice and make him think a lot more carefully about how he approaches the striking here. So whilst minute to minute they might be a bit closer, and I do agree Rodolfo Viera has looked better on the feet. He impressed me in that Petrosky fight, despite the fact that I was expecting him to clearly be inferior. It did go down to the wire. But yeah, at the end of the day, Rodolfo Viera I look at in a very like black and white blueprint kind of way. Can you stop his takedowns? Is your striking good enough to beat him? And I think Tresean Gore, potentially the answer is yes to both of those things. So when we're talking about a plus 180 underdog, and that may potentially get better because people don't like Tresean Gore, they think he's awful, and people for some reason really like betting on Rodolfo Viera, I think that plus 180 is worth a go. I can't guarantee you that it's going to be a winner, and I can't tell you to point to a specific moment of tape and go, this is exactly what's going to happen. But I think Tresean Gore looks like he's got the fundamentals that he needs to turn this into a winnable fight. I just hope that he can get it over the line if the opportunity arises. So I'm happy to plus one this pick. I think that Tresean Gore is definitely the betting side. And hopefully we see an upset there, as we have done for the past few cards.
So with the plus one from Will, that's a low confidence pick in Tresean Gore. And just hearing both of you speak reminded me of two things about this fight that I didn't mention, was that Viera, when he expends a lot of energy with the takedowns, we've seen in a few of his fights, he does tend to slow down as the fight progresses. So one of the things he's trying to do is be more tactical with his takedowns, and so that means he doesn't necessarily go hell for leather straight away. I think we may see that he starts standing and kind of it's a bit more tactical when he shoots, rather than just go hell for leather straight out the gate. And the other point I wanted to mention is that Tresean Gore does have a wrestling background, so he's got amateur state titles. And he has some experience in Muay Thai, so he's not like the highest caliber of wrestling background, but he has got that in his back pocket. He has got BJJ and Muay Thai in his background, I think he just needs to win this fight as well. That's another point I was going to make. The motivation here. I'm not saying Rodolfo Viera doesn't need to win this fight. He does, but I don't think the UFC are going to cut him if he loses, because he's got that, the fan following, and he's got the fan following from before he even joined the UFC. But Tresean Gore is probably going to be cut if he doesn't win this fight. I kind of like betting on fighters whose backs are against the wall, and I think, I do think that it's a good opportunity here, potentially, to consider a bet on Tresean Gore.
So looking into our bets for the card, this is a tricky card, really, to be honest. I've targeted 3 underdogs. I've only bet one of them so far. The first one is Chris Duncan. I have bet him at plus 170. Don't really know where the odds are going at the moment, but I'm happy with that number. I don't think it'll move too much. If it does, I might invest a little bit more, but I'm kind of happy with the idea of having 1.5 as my basic number that I revolve around going forward. Tresean Gore, literally just talked about it. I think around plus 180, that is it's a shot worth taking. So hopefully it comes through. And finally, Nora Conol. I think that her opponent Carol Rosa is looking a little bit weathered and a little bit on the decline. Nora Conol is a pretty dangerous striker. She's awful wrestler. She's like a white belt wrestler and grappler. She's pretty awful there. And I think that people are expecting Carol Rosa to just take her down and wipe the floor with her. Whilst that is doable, and we have seen Rosa use a grappling kind of style before, she's primarily a striker. And so I'm keen that potentially we could see Nora Conol look like great value here, because if we get a striking fight, the French woman is the better striker and will win a striking fight, I think. So I'm kind of banking on Rosa not grappling as much as people are expecting here. I think that to rely on somebody to use their plan B skill set that doesn't come naturally to them at a favorite of this price, it's not the right thing to do. So I'm kind of waiting around, just hoping that the price on Conol gets a little bit bigger, because people think that they see a genius angle here, which I don't think exists. So those will be my 3 money lines. I may sprinkle a little bit more on them, or maybe a prop or 2 if I want to get a bit cute. But that's probably going to be the basis of my slate for this week.
I had a couple of bets that I was considering for the main event, the over and the Albazi point spread, as I mentioned before. But as that's fallen out, I've added Chris Duncan here. I want to do a little bit more research into that, but I think I probably will get to that bet. I think that's a good bet. I haven't placed any bets yet, so this is just my thinking. Then I quite like Rebecki. I just want to look into that a little bit more, but he's quite short money at the moment, so I need to consider him with a second leg. Nakamura might be a good second leg, actually. Now I've heard Josh's breakdown, so maybe Rebecki and Nakamura. We talked about not doing parlays of heavy favorites, but if the value's there, it's there. And then I'm considering the Neil Magny point spread. I haven't really looked into this fight too much. It might be better off playing the money line. I think both these fighters, Magny and Zaleski, are washed. And Magny has some advantages, height and reach advantage, grappling it upside. He's got the ability to control and make the fight very dull, shall we say. I think if Zaleski's winning, he's probably finishing Magny. So there's different ways to attack this. I need to give it a little bit more thought. What have you got, Josh?
Look, it's a bit of a struggle. I'm normally never good at looking at bets, let alone placing bets. So I'm keeping my my thing relatively clean. Nakamura money line, which is typical for me to think. I'm always going to back Nakamura, I feel like. But then the parlay here, which I normally add somewhat in a niche way, typically it's a inside the distance parlay or an over 2.5 rounds parlay. This time it's a bit more simplistic. Rebecki, KO, and then Magny, Zelensky, Dos Santos over 2.5 rounds. That's what I got. And as usual, I suppose each Wednesday I write up my and I post it on the MMA betting subreddit. So you'll see my full picks there, my full alt bets there, which is what I recommend usually people to look at. Because my alt bets are pretty hefty and they do land at a relatively average to low pace.
Well, there you have it. UFC Vegas 108. We still don't know what the main event's going to be, but hopefully it adds a little bit more spice to this otherwise quite underwhelming card. We've done our best. It's probably a little bit more lackluster than you're used to, but as I said, this card's a train wreck. We've been your hosts. Enjoy the week, enjoy the fights. I hope that these picks all cash and that we come into next week feeling happy about some winners. Enjoy the card.